Welcome, everyone. It is good to see all of you, and what a great honor it is to have these dignitaries among us tonight. And I want to just say how much I appreciate them taking time tonight to come and discuss this crucial matter with us. Let's clap our hands one more time and welcome our panel. We're thankful tonight. We're going to start on my left, and I'm going to allow each one of these people to introduce themselves, and then I will begin the dialogue for the evening.
Good evening, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. My name is Ivy Taylor. I'm a member of the San Antonio City Council. I represent District 2, which includes San Antonio's east side as well as a good portion of the northeast. And I am a wife, a mom, and a city planner.
Awesome.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Kevin Duhart. I'm the lead pastor of the Rock Fellowship in Universal City, Texas. I'm a husband, father of two, concerned parent, and as well as I have my own organization for young people that we're starting called Hey Young World, which reaches back into the inner city community, developing young entrepreneurs.
Amen. Awesome.
Good evening, everybody. I'm District 7 City Councilman Cris Medina, and I have the pleasure of serving this community. This is actually in District 7, so I'm very excited to be here tonight with all of y'all. I'm a husband, father, member of the Air Force Reserves. I've served as a public affairs officer, and very glad and excited to be here with y'all tonight.
Good evening to everybody. I am Tommy Calvert Jr. I'm the co-founder and general manager of San Antonio Community Radio, KROV 91.7 HD2 FM, and we're very proud to have served San Antonio for the last 2.5 years. Elder Lockhart is in the house. He does our Sunday morning gospel programming from 6 a.m. to 1 p.m. And the part that you should applaud for is that Elder Lockhart won Best New Gospel Program in the state of Texas by the American Gospel Announcers Guild. And so we are a community radio station that talks about community issues, an urban radio station with gospel, R&B, jazz, blues, and we're really honored to be part of Place for Life and the community's conversation on this case. Thank you, Bishop.
Thank you all very much. As I have traveled this country the last couple of months, in particular from Chicago to San Francisco, to Stockton, to Orlando, there's been an outcry for many things in regards to this case. It's not select in Florida, but it has become very much nationwide concern. I began to pray about it and really felt impressed that we had the opportunity, because we're such an integrated church, to bring this issue to an open forum. So the purpose of our dialogue tonight is to allow an opportunity for leaders of our community to tell us and to converse with us about cures, not about harm, but about healing. What do we hope to accomplish? We hope that tonight will be the catalyst of something that will be long-lasting in the city of San Antonio, that all racial walls, barriers, every mindset of segregation will be completely demolished by highly educated, purposeful, and productive people that we call leaders in our community. Do you guys think we can accomplish that? I do as well. One thing I have noticed, and someone asked me the other day, you know, Pastor Rick, why would you take this on? Well, first of all, I have 5 reasons. All 5 of my grandchildren are biracial babies. Number 1, I want them to live a very peaceful life. Number 2, our church is a very integrated church, with 65% of our church being African American, about 30% of our church being Hispanic, and then there's a few white folks in our church. And so I thought, you know what, this is a great place to have this conversation. I told the church this morning, I do not really believe the White House has the cure for this issue, or the courthouse, or the schoolhouse, but I believe God's house has the answer for this particular thing. Martin Luther King Jr., I saw this today and I thought I would read it to you. He said, "I refuse to accept the view that mankind is so tragically bound to the starless midnight of racism and war that the bright daybreak of peace and brotherhood can never become a reality. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word." I'll say a few more statements. I remember the late 90s, early 2000s, I used to go to South Africa, Pastor, about 4 times a year to speak to leaders there. Right after apartheid ended, I went the year after it ended. The leaders pulled me into a room on the side of the building. They said, "Pastor, we're going to ask you, please, do not address the subject of racism with us." And I became very inquisitive. I said, "Why is that?" And they said, "We have no respect for how America has handled this issue in the last 40 years. And we really do not believe Americans have anything to tell us." Nelson Mandela is tonight laying probably on his deathbed. He's 95 years old. He won't be with us much longer, and it, to me, is a prophetic transition in history. What a great man, 18 years in one cell. He said these words, "I detest the thought of racism because in my mind it is nothing more or nothing less than barbaric. Whether it come from white men or black men, it is detestable." I fully concur with Nelson Mandela. And for some reason, this case that happened in a little town in Florida reached back to 1968 and grabbed a bandage that we obviously covered an abscess with and abruptly and aggressively exposed that wound. And when it did, what has come out of this situation is not pretty. It is something that we are challenged with as a country. And I believe, as Martin Luther King Jr. believed, peace is a reality. It's not a fantasy. We can have it. And we must get to the place where all races come together. The word race in itself denotes aggression. Someone wins and someone loses, which creates a superior mentality. I told Tommy the other day on the radio, racism is nothing more than a result of an awful concoction of pride and fear. And the fruit of that is horrible. So today we're going to go past the fruit, we're going to get to the root, and I believe by the end of this meeting tonight, we're going to all understand what integration really is. The root word is integer, which means to be completely mature. You are immature when you refuse to integrate. I refuse. God told Abraham, "Leave your country and your kind. I've got a bigger world for you to enjoy." I learned one thing. When I left Baton Rouge, Louisiana, I left a very racist community. And the first man I went to work for in ministry was a black man. And he taught me what it was to pray, to seek God. And when I began to embrace not color but cultures way beyond the color of skin and appreciate where people came from, then it taught me to love the individual and not just the community. We have to get there, folks. Do you believe that? How many of you can say that you believe there is hope for the United States of America in regards to this issue? Tommy, I so enjoyed our conversation the other day. You're insightful, and your subject matter is always on point. Share with us your feeling. What do you see? What do you feel?
You know, thank you, Bishop, for convening this. And I think that when we look at the roots of why the nation reacted, in some cases in very different ways, but let's just talk about the reaction that black Americans had in the streets. Over 100 protests just last weekend, which we were a part of. And I'll tell you why, where that root comes from. But I think the bottom line of why there's the outrage is that individuals and parents just say, We cannot stand for a country where you murder our children and there's no justice. We cannot have an environment of laws where our children can be profiled and shot down innocently. And that's where the street outrage comes from. The roots of it, of course, are part of the motivation for political action as well, because in this country, we remember the 3/5 compromise, where when the founding fathers were looking at how do we count the blacks as slaves, we were counted as 3/5 of a human being. And that feeling where we only got 1/5 justice from the police department that didn't necessarily investigate all the ins and outs in the proper way, that some things were missing. There's that injustice feeling once again. The sense that we used to have mobs that would lynch black men and women and black families. And there is a fear that the country could revert back to those days of persecution and oppression if we allow the death of a child to go without justice. And I think that is the jet stream of movement amongst the communities of color and communities of, who care about this. And I think that in the reconciliation part, of course, South Africa, when they were dealing with their paths in segregation, they had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Right. And they invited people to tell of the abuses so that they could close the chapter and move forward as a nation. And what is disappointing when we have our Facebook debates or when we have debates at the office water cooler is for some, particularly in white America, they're not hearing anything of this concern. And that we cannot shut down. We cannot shut each other down. If someone comes to you with a situation, and you know this as a pastor, and they have abuse, and there's history there of abuse, you've got to let that out. You've got to go ahead and get that out so that you can take the next step forward. And for many black Americans, you know, racism is fundamentally has a power dynamic to it. And so if blacks are not the ones leading and in power, controlling, and we are coming to our white brothers and sisters who are in the majority, and they are shut down, shutting us down, saying that, well, in some cases, if you wear a certain thing, then you're going to get gunned down and all that kinds of thing. That's where the hurt continues, and we can't move forward until we are able to really talk to each other and open our hearts and open our minds to each other. So I think that's the foundation for this whole discussion of why there's so much debate and animosity.
In regards to that, what would be, and you guys please feel free to interject, what would be the cure? I mean, where does that start? How do we start that? How does that dialogue even begin when you talk about something that, this is a pastor speaking, I'm going to always speak from a spiritual perspective. The spirit behind that thing is not just going to walk off. It has created a polarization in this nation that is so vast, the chasm is so large that we hollering at each other just to hear each other. And now we've, in my opinion, Tommy, now we've rewind the tape and we're going to start all over. There has to be a better way. Of course, I think I have the answer. But you guys interject. Ivy?
Well, what I would say, and I think folks would expect me to come forward with some sort of policy proposal. I think a lot of the folks that are in elected office, you know, want to put together big forums or pass laws. But really, I think it comes down to a person-to-person transformation. That's what I personally feel is missing to a great extent in our society that, you know, for me, when I look at what happened with this particular case, I felt like, and I'm not going to get down in the weeds on specifics, but I felt like that many of the people in the courtroom were able to ignore the basic humanity of that gentleman walking down the street. And so that points to the question to me, why are they able to do that? What makes him so foreign, so strange, so different that they can't see him as their son, their brother, their nephew, their friend from school? And then even as the whole situation played out, to hear some of the reactions to friends of his that testified and how people couldn't relate to that aspect as well, to me, I just felt pointed to that great divide. And it's what's so interesting about it is that nowadays we have opportunities to mix and mingle in the workplace and in schools. I'm very intrigued by how you describe the demographics of your church. My church certainly is not. I attend Greater Corinth Baptist Church on the east side, which is a traditional Black Baptist church. And I think your church is probably very different from most churches in America. But we have to figure out a different place for people to have those one-on-one interactions so that they will be willing to hear the other side. They will be willing to see the humanity of others. They will be able to relate to people who look and live differently than they do. I really believe that that's where it starts, but that's so long term, and we all want an immediate answer and an immediate response.
And you just introduced something that is huge in my mind. I mean, you said a lot. But the one thing that stands out to me is racism isn't just located in color, it's also located in culture. I know in the white community, it is. You make a lot of money, then there's this mindset that you're superior to those in the community that have the same color skin as you have, but they live down in the trailer park and not on the 100-acre ranch. So I think you know, this mindset, that's why I said I just have to believe there's a spirit behind this thing that is driving it. And that's why, again, in the end, I'm going to say God's house is the answer. Councilman?
I think Councilwoman Taylor made a great point. And what I was thinking, you know, what am I going to say, or what can I bring? And I think Councilwoman Taylor hit it on the head, is that we need to talk to each other. We need to have that dialogue in the community. We took the family just a couple of weeks ago to Orlando, and that's not far from Sanford, right, from the community that this tragedy occurred. And that's what this is. This is a tragedy that, for all intents and purposes, should have been avoided. As a father, I've got a 10-year-old and a 6-year-old, and not too far away, my 10-year-old, he already calls himself a preteen. He says he's a preteen, and I know that young Trayvon was a teenager, so not far off from that age, right, that I already have to start thinking is, how do the police look at how will they look at my son? How will my neighbors look at my son? And it got me to think of, not as my role as a council member, but my role as a father. What can I do? How can I engage our community better? Something that stuck with me today, and it's been in my mind, is that leaders listen. Leaders don't just, I think for us, we want to always try and find the solution, but I think the solution lies through dialogue like this, and leadership has to listen in order for us to enact something. So I think that the process has begun already. The reconciliation has begun. It needs to have begun. And I pray a lot. I'm prayerful, and I'm praying for the families that were impacted. I think that's the best thing that we can do moving forward in the reconciliation process.
Pastor, if I could just kind of say this about the moving forward process. I think that part of the ingredients of the potion of moving things forward has to be a real concentration and dialogue on loving each other, right, as human beings. Yeah. What happened to Mr. Zimmerman just saying, "Son, are you lost? Can I help you get somewhere?"
You know, I posted a statement on my Facebook, just to interject, and it started a a mess. And I heard an athlete say it. He said, in my dream world, I wish Zimmerman would have offered Trayvon Martin a ride home.
Yeah, out of the rain.
And man, there it went.
You know, and so you know, we have a lot of people who go to church every Sunday and haven't received the transformation that God's love can provide for how we look at each other as human beings. So I know politicians have to steer away from, you know, the separation of church and state, but I do think there is something to be said about speaking about their moral leadership and using the faith principles to influence culture. You know, I used to run a global human rights organization that fought slavery and genocide around the world, the American Anti-Slavery Group. And I worked in a coalition to expose the persecution of Christians in the Sudan who were enslaved and persecuted. And I got to work with everybody from Pat Robertson to Al Sharpton. I didn't put them in the same room together, but I listened to them all, and I learned from them all. And one of the things that liberals we tend to do, and I'm a progressive, is that we tend to put a lot of policy prescriptions and economic delineations and all of these kinds of things into solving a problem. Conservatives tend to look at the culture and try to transform the culture, and I think the answers are in both. Yeah. And I think we are missing something in moving us forward. We do need some things in terms of policy. We do need to question why 1 in 3 black men are going through the justice system. We do need to look at some of those policies, but we also need to speak to the culture and the atmosphere of love. And it does transpire to our white brothers and sisters, but there's also a responsibility within our families for men to stand up and be fathers, be present, for even if you cannot get along sometimes in that marriage, there still has to be a willingness to put the differences between the parents aside so that you can raise that child and do the best thing in the interest of that child. And so many people, you know, in my business and community radio and community news, I come across a lot of people, a lot of people, and I hear a lot of things about how people interact with each other. And I think, you know, and I think we mentioned this on the show. I went to school and majored in international relations with a specialty in global conflict, but it's all about relationships and how you interact, whether you're talking about Israel and Palestine or whatever. It all comes down to how humans interact with each other. And what the religious community can do and what our schools and even the policy need to look at is, why don't we teach each other how to resolve conflicts? How to get along. Yeah. You know, that character education, there's a lot to be said for that. Yeah.
You know, I'm going to just a little bit. After I saw the verdict, I heard of the verdict, and etc., after following the case, my wife being on top of it, I had a different reaction immediately. I was numb because it took me a couple of hours to process what I just heard. I woke up the next day and I was angry. I'm raising 2 young boys, my sons, 1 7, 1 5, and I think about their future and their lives being cut short at 17. But it did something for me. It woke up something in me that began to ask the question, why? Not so much why his senseless death, but in my generation, or for the emerging generation, what's going to be our outcry? And I thought about history, and then you go back to the annals of history and you look throughout the early 1900s, the women's suffrage movement, moving up into the Jim Crow South, and the churches, how they came together, and that became the center of information, where you found out where we were marching, what we were rallying against, what we were standing against, what we're boycotting, who we're not supporting. How are we going to economically affect this unjust system? Because if anybody understands anything, they understand green. And you stop spending money, you're going to wake up the powers that be, and they will address your issue, even if for monetary gain. But I began to ask myself the question. In the 50s, there were generations that spoke out. They wrote songs about struggle. In the 60s, Marvin Gaye asked the question, what's going on? You know, mercy, mercy me, you know, and the things were, people were singing songs that were pushing a movement saying we're against war. We're against Vietnam, and in the 80s, we're against drugs. I wonder, though, what is my generation's outcry? What are we not saying? And what do we need to be saying? And so that's my purpose for tonight, is to walk away with something with these wonderful men and women that we could hold on to as our generation, because as Bishop, you said a moment ago, as Nelson Mandela, his death, his dying is the death of not the death, but it's the transitioning of a past movement and a new group emerging. What are we saying? Mm-hmm. What are my children going to remember that daddy said, that daddy's generation stood for? Wow. Will it just be gay marriage, or will it be something more meaningful about securing our lives? What are we going to stand for?
Powerful. Excellent. You guys have touched on so much. Tommy, I want to come back, and I want our city council members to address this too. Is that what happened, the case in Sanford? Is it stereotypical? Is that really the justice system of America?
I don't think, we'll put it to you this way. In my own family, I saw someone very close to me get a disproportionate sentence. I don't think you have to go far to find that. I think every family who is of color has had that experience. Mm-hmm. You can listen to what Mark Garagos said on CNN. As a criminal defense attorney, he says, we see that black men and women are brought through the court system day in and day out like cattle, just moving them in, moving them out. When you go down to the Bexar County Courthouse, I happen to have elected a lot of judges for a living and doing political consulting, and you walk into the courtroom and it's largely minorities going through the justice system. You look at the incarceration population, and so considering that we are not the majority of the population, but we're so disproportionately the ones affected by the justice system, there is miscarriage of justice every second of the day. Mm-hmm. Every second of the day. And sometimes it happens, you know, my first instance of actually being profiled was on a military base at Fort Sam Houston. It was summer of 1999 when the Spurs were first going to the finals, and my buddy Raj Daniels, he's my Indian brother, he said, well, my mom told, his mother was a colonel and a doctor, and he said, well, the Post has some extra tickets. You know, and nobody knows that, you know, everybody thought they were all sold out, so we decided to camp out. You know, we were teenagers. We decided to camp out in front of the ticket house. And at that time, I was driving my dad's Fleetwood Brougham, 1988 burgundy with a white top, Fleetwood Brougham. And so, you know, my parents had always talked to me about being careful on a military base, don't speed. So I was watching my speed. I knew the speed limit was 20. I know it to this day, that it's 20, okay? And I'm not speeding through Fort Sam Houston. I'm literally watching, and all of a sudden the police come. And so I pull over, and, you know, this is one of the things that is very typical of how you get profiled. The officer said, well, your tail light's out. That's one of the things that happens, and a lot of us know that story. Now, just for the purpose of moving forward, if I learned later after this incident that if a police officer says that to you, you say instantly, officer, show me the defect. And if he can't show you that defect, you get his badge and you make a complaint. That's how it works. But the tail light wasn't out when I checked it later. I was just being stopped because I was a black man in a Cadillac on a military base, and I was a young black man. He realized everything was okay, but I got to tell you, there were about eight police cars, including the paddy wagon. Okay.
Wow.
They were ready to take me. They were ready to take me right then. But I was able to diffuse the situation and remain calm. But so many young people do not know how to diffuse those situations and react. And maybe, you know, we don't know what really happened with Trayvon. We really don't know what happened.
Right.
And, you know, it's as some have said, a fight or flight situation. And you know, I tried to. I had the rapper Question on my show, and I told him, I said, you know, you really have to get that sense of dignity about you and a sense of presence when you have conflicts like that, and you have to do your best to de-escalate the situations. You got to humble yourself, and because if you don't, you might wind up dead or beaten, and that's a sad truth of being a black person in America. And so that injustice in and of itself that we have to teach our kids growing up.
Is that the consensus among the audience here? Do you agree with what Tommy's saying? That's strong stuff.
I wanted to add that I believe that what happened really is par for the course. Really, we shouldn't be surprised. However, I'll make a confession here. We have all become comfortable, okay? Because there are a lot of us who aren't struggling, okay? We're living in comfortable homes. We're living behind gates, okay? We don't have to deal with these issues on a day-to-day basis, while our black and brown brothers and sisters with less financial and material resources, they are dealing with this every day in their neighborhoods, on their streets. And many of us have become comfortable, and that's why the outcry hasn't been there. But when you have a case like this that on its face seems so obvious, you know, he's walking home with a bag of Skittles and a drink, obviously innocent, then that's what caused, you know, everyone to rise up again. But these things are happening every day. There was a book that came out a few years ago that a lot of people have been talking about called The New Jim Crow by, I think her name is Michelle Alexander. And I encourage everyone in here to read it. I've finished about half of it, I'll admit. But it's actually kind of depressing, though, how, you know, I was talking about trying to address the issue on a one-by-one basis, person to person, but the big monster is the institutional racism. You know, how do you address? It's not that one judge necessarily, or that one lawyer, or even that one police officer that necessarily has ill intent, but for some reason the history and the construction of the entire system seems to lead to a certain outcome, and no one has been really willing to tackle that issue. I think partly because there was something you were saying earlier, Bishop, I can't remember what it was, but to me, this case also points to the social and economic stratification that we have in the United States. And I think that's part of the issue, that as long as our poor brothers and sisters, it's easy for us to dismiss, oh, they put themselves in that situation, why don't they do better for themselves? Why don't they do this? Why don't they do that? And those of us who are more comfortable just gloat. You know, I think it's very interesting that it happened in a gated community. And I certainly believe that the fact that Mr. Martin was black led to the incident, but also the fact that he was a pedestrian. What does that say about us in community? That there was something strange and threatening about him because he was literally walking the street in a certain part, you know, of town, that we've gotten to such a place of disconnect that we don't expect anyone to walk on the streets. You know, I grew up in New York, so we did a lot more walking there. And I'm raising a Texan. My daughter is 9. And I remember we were driving down the street one day, and she saw someone walking, and she kind of made a comment like, well, there must be something wrong with them. Why are they walking down the street? And I thought, oh my God, what can I do to let her know it's okay to walk on the streets? But I think these are all some of the symptoms of, you know, of folks just being so focused on their own internal lives, what happens within the four walls of my house, whether I'm comfortable, what's in my bank account, and if that's okay, then I'm not really out here fighting any battles.
Right. And I think also that, you know, just as we have been very honest about our history, we can be very honest about dysfunction within our own families in Black America. I think some white Americans got to be honest that some of these laws were created to keep us down. Where's that honesty? When you talk about the fact that there was a corporate-funded legislative lobby called ALEC that created the Stand Your Ground laws and many other laws that have not been beneficial to black people. And let's take the case you asked about, are these miscarriages of justice happening often? We have the case in Florida of Marissa Alexander, who was not afforded a stand your ground defense with a domestic abusive husband. She fired into a wall, didn't kill anybody, got 20 years. Didn't kill anybody. Stand your ground was a defense she tried to use. She got 20 years trying to fend off her husband who had been convicted in a court of law.
Was that in Florida as well?
By the same,
we need to pray for Florida,
yeah, amen.
First of all.
We really do. By the same prosecutor who was prosecuting in the Trayvon Martin case. Wow. So yes, miscarriages of justice are happening. And yes, income.
Let me say this, Tommy. I'm a white guy.
You're good with me.
I remember preaching in the Bahamas, and someone listened on the radio, and they came and said, where's the black man that was preaching last night? We have people come to our church and say, I want to meet the pastor because they heard me on the radio. And they say, it's him right there. And they say, no, I'm talking about the black guy I heard on the radio. But let me say this. A lot of, not in defense of anything, I am here to mediate, and my heart is to heal. But a lot of white people, what is the root word of ignorant? It's ignore. And we've been taught, you just ignore that. You just live. And I don't want you to think that white people are as educated as you think they are, because they're not. They're not that. They don't know all of what you're saying. They're not studying those stats. And part of the problem today is stats. Because as sure as you bring them out, I'm going to get a boatload of inbox messages saying, this is what he didn't say, where a black cop killed a white kid and nothing. And so it just goes back and forth, and it's a never-ending thing. And I just really feel, and you guys both hit on it very strongly, all of you have touched on this. Edwin Lewis Cole said the curse of this generation is not a race, it's the absentee father. Paul wrote to the church in Corinth in Scripture and said, you got 10,000 teachers, you don't have no fathers. The problem with our country today, in my opinion, we got a man problem. We've got a father problem. We've got a situation where everybody's doing what is right in their own eyes, last verse in the book of Judges. And nobody is fathering this generation. Nobody is in lives of these young people that are men saying, this is manners. When someone walks into your classroom who is an adult, stand up, shake their hand, look in their eyes, and introduce yourself by your full name. Am I right or am I wrong? There's no one doing that. And I'm not talking about black America. I'm talking about America, period. So that, that's one of the roots to this tree. Councilman?
You couldn't have said it more better. I agree. I think that we have, as a country, in a sense, we've gotten away from those values of being respectful and cherishing our elders and our grandparents and saying yes sir and yes ma'am.
Yes.
I'm thankful. I thank God every day. I had my father growing up, and he taught me right from wrong, and he taught me to be respectful to my grandparents and to be there for my kids when I became a father myself. And I don't want to sound disrespectful, but we do need that more in our country, even more so now, more than ever.
Let me go ahead, Pastor.
I was thinking, based on a moment ago, and yes, sir. And so when you look at, I was reading. My mom used to take us to, and my parents are married. Been married 36 years, I believe, this month. But my mom used to take us to the Carver Library on, I think it's on Commerce, every week or so, she'd be on her way to Barbara Jordan Community Center. She exercised with the jazzercise class Monday through Thursday. So we'd have to stop by the Carver Library to get books. And she said, I'm going to let you guys read about what they're not going to teach you in school. So we didn't know about, the song Lift Every Voice and Sing, and we didn't know those songs. So we learned them. She taught them to us at home. We had to read books. You had to have 2 books of black history and 1 book that I could choose. I chose football and karate stuff, and she would give us books on Sojourner Truth or Harriet Tubman, but then also Medgar Evers and the late Marcus Garvey. And so with that, I had developed a sense of self early. I think in the black community, whatever community you're a part of, but especially because I'm African American, if you couldn't tell, but in my community, I think that that's missing, that sense of knowing who you are and where you come from and the lineage of your people. There's a book by, and I read it, it's an awesome book by, I can't think of his name, it's called The Souls of Black Folks by W.E.B. Du Bois, thank you, sis. And he talked about a chapter called The Talented Tenth. Individuals who have made it, African Americans who have doing well, coming back though. So not just leaving and moving into the nice communities, but coming back and providing that same thing you've learned into a new culture, a new generation, and helping other people come out of that situation. I can't blame white America, Latin America. I got to blame us, because I feel that we could do a much better job as well. Now, there's some things that are not just, etc., but I believe that in my generation, nobody's going to give you anything unless you go and get it. And we have to work for it. We have to push ourselves and put ourselves in position. We got to educate ourselves. We got to encourage one another. And for those of us who do have something to offer, bring it back. Like these individuals, bring it back and create programs that allow others, and then get that stuff out there. There's stuff that's being done on the east side of San Antonio, on the northeast side of San Antonio, but there's more that we can do as an individual. There's more you can do in your church. There's programs you can give to your pastor saying, can we run this through our church? Am I right about that? There's just other things I believe that we can do. So in this verdict, I've dedicated myself over the past week and a half. I'm giving myself back. I'm putting things together now so I can give back to my generation, so that when my children get older, they can be proud of the fact that their dad was one of the talented 10th that came back to educate his community.
That is awesome, man.
Well, great point. Great points, Pastor. And one of the things that I would say is that you were very fortunate. We both were very fortunate that we had parents who gave us a little bit more than what the schools would give us, that we had people in our community that cared about us, that they knew about the resources to go to the library to get those things. But for those parents who don't, that is where institutional racism must be combated. There's actually a policy prescription. We need to be teaching our kids again about these things in the schools. Why is it that we skip over this great history that can inspire? We talk about the changes in Zacchaeus because it might inspire somebody to change. We talk about the miracles of Jesus because those stories inspire people to change. There are stories within our historical struggle that are powerful. Ivy may remember I put on the Know Why You're Marching Civil Rights and Film series at Martin Luther King Middle School because I wanted those kids to understand what was going on that allowed their school to be named after Martin Luther King. So we brought the civil rights leaders from Mississippi, from Alabama, from Georgia, all over the United States to MLK Academy. Just because many of those people were young people. Jesus was only 33 when he passed away. And so if a young person can be inspired, and having your mother speak that into your life and others speaking that into your existence, we don't control the school boards. It's just something to think about. How do these things get perpetuated? We don't institutionalize conflict resolution. We don't institutionalize discipline and things of that nature. I've asked people in the public schools because I did PR for the School of Excellence, and I noted that the kids were so much better disciplined than when I go to some of the public schools. And so I would talk to the administrators. Well, we can't do that because look, we got a crisis on our hands. What we're doing ain't working. We got 50% of black kids dropping out in some cases, or Hispanic children dropping out in some cases. Discipline, direction, motivation, dream building. That has to be done. What are we going to wait for? The whole country to crumble? You know, we have to do those things. And I do believe in obviously, my whole ethic of why I give back is because I went to religious schools my entire life. And because I was raised in the church. That's where the foundation is. And so absolutely. And that's where creative pastors like yourself, who don't just rely upon the Sunday walls to reach people, but go out, you know, as Jesus did, to reach those who, that's something that we have to do, is we've got to get the street ministry going. And guess what? That police officer that may have seen that hardened child may end up changing because they see a community surrounding that child. That's
true.
Y'all don't hear me talking. That's what we got to do.
You're right. You're right. Let me cross-pollinate just for a moment. My inspiration for life was my dad and my brothers. I'm the seventh of 7 kids, 7th child. And they all made their way and were very successful, but they made their own way. My inspiration in my purpose is all black men. All of them. And what I mean by that is when I looked for inspiration in doing what I do, I didn't look to white men. I looked to black men. So I want us to open our eyes and see the full spectrum. Tommy's really hitting on inspiration. It's powerful when you can sit among people that say, I did not receive all I know from my kind and my color, but there is a multifaceted community that lives inside of me. And that's where we have to get this generation too. Man, listen, stop listening and looking at everybody that look just like you and sounds just like you. What a boring life you must live. One of the most exciting times I have a 15-year-old black daughter that I adopted when she was 1 year old. Crystal's married to a black man. They have 4 biracial children. My other granddaughter's sitting on the front row tonight, half Hispanic, half white. You should see it, Councilman, when we walk into a restaurant. We laugh at everyone trying to figure out who the 15-year-old belongs to.
Who's the babysitter?
It's a wonderful experience, and I encourage you. And by the way, integrated babies is the most beautiful babies in the world. I'm sorry, y'all. There's something behind that. There's something. If you go to my Facebook and look at my grandchildren, I got proof. But I love that, you know, and I'll end it here, and then we'll take some Q&A for about 15 minutes. So you guys want to go ahead and start walking up to the moderators and giving them your question. You're welcome to do that at this time. I'll end it with this thought. I must ask, just in the mode of eschatology, could it be that we are definitely living in the end time? Not to scare anyone. But Matthew 24, Jesus said the telltale sign that you're in the end is not that kingdom would rise against kingdom only or specifically, but that nation would rise against nation. Study the Greek. It literally means ethnicity, ethnos, ethnic groups would rise against each other. There's a force right now in all countries with this problem. The interesting thing is Isaiah chapter 2. I told y'all I had the answer. I'm not going to ask the question unless I know I have the answer. Isaiah chapter 2, verse 1, in the last day, Pastor, the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains. Watch what it says. And all ethnicities shall flow into it. That's verse 1. By the time you get to verse 4 of chapter 2, it says, and nation will not rise against nation, because they will beat their swords into plowshares. Can I submit to you tonight that I believe the antidote to racism, the antithesis to it all, is the house of God. The house of God has to come back to a place of prominence in our families. Quit asking your children if they want to go to church. Y'all not hearing the preacher tonight. Stop asking your spouse, would you like to go to church with me? Put your dress on in your heels and go to the house of God, because you're going to receive a community that is integrated in feel, environment, in an appreciation. When we get here, we don't have time to look at you, see what color you are. We're too busy worshiping our Creator. There's healing in the house of God for all of these issues. So Jesus says in Mark chapter 11, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations. For all nations. People, listen to me tonight, please. I'm just a pastor in a community, in a city I love. I respect San Antonio because of its integration. San Antonio can be hard on you, but when you really look at the face of San Antonio, you see integration. Embrace where God put you in your life. This is a great city, but please do not forsake the house of God in your life and in the life of your family. Have you enjoyed the discussion tonight? We're going to take, because all the principles, even the policies that you so want to address, Tommy, they're all here. Every one of them. You know that. You're raised in it. But all of those issues that you say, we need to address that. The answer's here. Start here. Don't start there. Start here. Bring it there. Don't start out there and bring it here. Get the answer here and bring it there. Bring it to the city council. Bring it to the courtrooms. Bring it to the courthouse. Bring it to the White House. We are called to be influencers. Jesus said we are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. He said if the salt loses its flavor, then what use is it other than men trample on it? Let's season this generation with love. Let's show, Tommy, let's you and I join hands. Councilman Medina, let's join hearts. Let's join efforts. Let's show this face to America. Let's show this face to San Antonio and say, listen, this is what living for God, listen, and living a peaceful life is all about. Loving each other unconditionally. Amen. All right.
Bishop, just a quick comment. You opened the School of Excellence. You and Dr. Britton gave me the opportunity to be around. My senior year is 75% African American, and it was a privilege to be around and just have that camaraderie. People just don't know about it, man. And I just want to say thank you to you and Dr. Britton for doing that, because had you not done that, we wouldn't have had that type of opportunity at the School of Excellence. So
thank you.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate that. The School of Excellence, for those of you who do not know, the School of Excellence in Education is one of the largest charter schools in San Antonio with almost 2,000 students on 5 different campuses. I'm blessed to be able to be the founder, along with Dr. Linda Britton, who's sitting here, of that school, and that school is still going strong, and we're just glad for its success. Awesome. Yes, sir.
How you doing, Bishop? Everyone at the panel. I wonder if there's ever been addressed the King Alfred plan, a resolution passed back in the 50s. Called Rex 84, and it was later updated by President Bush. A plan that includes pretty much the elimination of the progress of blacks and other minorities. And that all kind of agencies have been built behind this Rex 84 plan to infiltrate organizations that come together for the empowerment and liberation of the black community. But these things have fallen on deaf ears and been reduced down to just YouTube videos. But it's actual real legislation that has been kind of a foundation for many of the laws that have been passed that tend to do exactly as the King Alfred plan suggests, which is to limit the progress that can be made. And I'm one to not believe that just because there's a black family in the White House, that everything's changed and we're now on our way. I look at it symbolically as, yes, we can achieve many things. But as we can see, our country still has a far way to go in dealing, especially with legislation from the top levels of government down. Mm-hmm. And if there's something that we can do as a people to gather this information on exactly what it is, what laws, and what our government has actually done to bring about these race issues that we have today, can we have that conversation as well? And not only that, but also want to touch on what you talked about as far as love and the message of love from Jesus and many other teachers of religion. We have to see that God's house is a people. It's not a building. It's not a specific church. It's not a specific religion. God's house is us. We are the temple. So if we're going to love and be a part of God's temple, we need to love ourselves and love one another and stop seeing each other as different races, because truth be told, Latin people, you are African people, just mixed with Spaniards. Spaniards, you are
great
African people taught by the Berbers and the Moors.
Let me make a few statements.
Yeah.
Number one, when you guys go to these microphones, be sure to ask a question. Number two, you mentioned we are the house of God. We are the temple of the Holy Spirit. But I don't want you to stand here and minimize the importance of the local assembly and communities.
I don't.
Okay, from Genesis to Revelation, the house of God as a place where God placed his name there is so strategically important. And yes, you are so correct on loving each other by loving ourselves. You can't really love me until you love yourself right. And we understand that as well. As far as the policy that you're referring to, are you familiar with it, Tommy? Would you like to address it?
No, I'm not, but I would like to just kind of address what your concern is from a different frame. And I think the first thing you have to realize is that the civil rights leaders who made progress for us, if they had focused on all that was against us, they never would have made it. The first thing that we have to do is focus on the kind of country we want, the kind of communities we want, and envision and dream about what that's going to look like, and then work to make it happen. So that's first and fundamental. Whether or not it was updated by George Bush, if I had let, starting our radio station, for example, there are less black radio stations in America than there ever have been. It's a very hard business. But when Clear Channel cut KSJL off the air, if I'd focused on the fact that all these billion-dollar corporations hate my guts for trying to do this, I would have just been stuck on my bed. I never would have gotten up. You have to keep moving and keep going forward. And so the biggest thing that I think we can sometimes get consumed by is negativity. So figure out what the agenda is, and your pastor is giving you a foundation by teaching the word for what a greater kingdom, a greater nation can be. And so I think that, as Pastor said, yes, the answers are here about how we treat each other, how things should be ordered. And I just look forward to more people moving to make those things happen. We got to stop talking about it and be about it. That's the big thing. That's
good. Very good. Guys, also, when you ask the question, please state your name so we can address you.
Hello, everyone. My name is TJ, and I want to thank you all for speaking about this subject amongst all of us in the community. I think it's really vital that we do discuss it and we're open about it. But my question is, it appears that the trust in the black community, not just in the black community, wherever poverty exists, period, it appears that the trust to the judicial system or for the judicial system has been broken. Trust to police officers responding to a certain crime in my old neighborhood, they're not going to come. How do we start back rebuilding that trust? How do we get back to a place? How do we communicate that to our young people that we can trust our government or our systems that are in place already? Or do we just focus on building up good young men and women?
You gave us an easy out on that last statement.
Well, I guess I would say it would be naive for any of us who are parents to just tell our kids to just trust the system, because we want them to survive and to thrive. So we've got to strike that balance of trying to provide them the best foundation. For those of us who have opportunity to reach out to children who maybe don't have responsible parents in the home, through mentoring programs or through churches, to try to make an impact so that maybe they won't be in certain situations, because sometimes the situation can help lead to the negative outcome, okay? So now the situation that Mr. Martin was in was innocent. There was no reason for that particular outcome. But sometimes, when you're young and you're not thinking, you can put yourself in a certain situation that may have a better chance of leading to a negative outcome. So we want to shape our young people and provide them a strong foundation so that they can make good choices. But then we also want them to have an understanding of what some of the failures and frailties of our current system are, so that they can be aware in that respect as well. And then there are so many different avenues where we can try to chip away at the institution, but there's not going to be one magic bullet that will just automatically change it. But I do think that this issue, as far as the criminal justice system and institutional racism, is something that we should all be thinking and talking more about. It should be much higher on the public policy radar screen than it is right now. And again, I believe that part of the reason it's not is because just so many people are comfortable because it's not affecting them.
We were hoping to have a judge on the panel tonight. We just failed to do that. But powerful answer and a great question. Man, that scares me a little bit, I'll be honest, because if we raise up a generation that does not trust the judicial system and the justice as it is, then we all walk around insecure with the feeling of anything could happen to anybody at any time. Trust is such a vital factor for health. When trust is broken, it is so detrimental to one's identity and well-being. So that really concerns me, and that's a great question. Councilman, do you have any input?
What I wanted to add to that is that I think we must be mindful that it is an imperfect system. And I think Councilwoman Taylor said it well in that I think because there's a tendency to kind of maybe complacency sets in, or it's not an issue that's directly impacting us, that we shouldn't be worried about it. But I think the Trayvon Martin case kind of just brought everything back up to the surface of how the system is imperfect, created by imperfect human beings. And we are imperfect, and we have to strive to make it better out there in the community.
Great answer.
Let me just say this, Pastor, that there is a saying, if you've never heard it before, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance.
Yeah.
The price of your freedom is eternal vigilance. And that means that you always have to be watching for slippages to your rights, to your freedom. You always do. You always do. That's our obligation. That's the price we pay for citizenship in this country. And to be involved in your community to ensure that that happens is really important. And that's how you build trust, really, is by making sure that people who are in leadership are held accountable to the things that you have deemed are important for the survival. Obviously, people in the justice system don't have much of a lobby. They're marginalized. They're looked down upon because they made a mistake. And so their lobby to affect equality of their outcomes is largely non-existent. This silver lining, if there is any, on this whole tragedy of Trayvon Martin has to be this focus on how we look at each other as human beings. There is some healing that's going on. Things like this are a silver lining, if I can even say that. Things like a look at the justice system and a look at our country. It is disturbing to me from an ideological perspective to watch when I see sometimes on Fox News, when I see You know, sometimes, and I'm just going to be, we got to be honest for a second. So you're going to, some people may not like what I'm about to say, but I'm going to keep it real. Keep it 100, as the kids say. Keep it 100. When Sean Hannity comes on and says, this is the greatest country in the world, and I do believe it is the greatest country in the world, but he does it from a sense of ensuring that we don't look at our past transgressions. In other words, if you always have a wall that says this is the greatest thing that you'll ever get, and you don't look at that past mistakes that we do certainly have and still exist. We didn't just get rid of 300 years of oppression overnight. We're still a work in progress. We're still trying to become a more perfect nation. It disturbs me that in the course of the dialogue, to prevent change from happening in the justice system, you know, they're going to blame victims of what they wear. They're going to say this is the greatest country and all these kinds of things. And that's very disturbing because that's being used, quite frankly, politically, and I smell it a mile away, from stopping the transformation of equality in our system. And yes, money influences. You know, if someone gets in trouble, I ask them, because I elect judges for a living, I said, okay, what judge are you going to? And then, you know, I ask them, who's your lawyer? And if I'm going to be truthful with you, I'm going to tell you, you may want to look at what lawyers contributed to that judge, because the money linkage is going to,
wow.
Oh, I'm just keeping it real.
You sure are.
You know, that's going to give you a better outcome because your lawyer can afford to make political contributions. They probably have a relationship. And so that's a sad part about that corrupting force,
right?
That green force, but it is a reality, and because we have not had access to green, we don't get the same kind of equality.
Two more questions, yes.
I'm a member of the Rock Fellowship, and I really have two questions, especially for the pastors. Do you think as a society we glorify the wrong people, number one? And number two, the fathers that are present, do you think the church does a good job of glorifying them?
Yes and no.
I think I'm going to address the first one. Bishop's been pastoring way longer than I have. But I think we have to be careful because what I'm afraid of, which is already happening, is the media. Not all media, but much of it. And how they've, as he spoke just a second ago, even with Fox News and even with CNN, the agenda, how I'm covering the story, it somewhat pins us against one another. If you just watch carefully, I have a conglomerate of emotions when I'm watching CNN. But then I'll flip over to Fox and I'll have another set of emotions in a matter of 30 minutes, you know, as he mentioned Sean Hannity and Bill O'Reilly and some of the others. And the fact that they have such a voice, it shapes our thinking to some degree. And it causes us to be afraid of one another. It polarizes, even with this Trayvon Martin case, how you've heard the extremes of both sides. Somehow this young man's death, who probably wasn't even concerned about political anything, became the most political thing ever. It became liberals against conservatives. It became, rich folks against poor folks. It became you speak good English against this person who speaks what we think as Ebonics, and etc. It just became more. And if we're not careful by what we see on television, it will continue to create this divide against us. Even throughout Facebook and Twitter, I see my generation saying things we would not say to each other's face, but just so easily
so true.
Putting it out there, you know.
So true.
And I'm just afraid that if we're not careful, and as you mentioned about the house of God, if we're not careful, a media will be the thing that we so desperately put all of our viewership into, etc., will be the thing that divides us even further, causing this country to have a great collapse in our relationship with one another. Bishop, you can have that father's question.
Thank you. I would say, just a caveat for a second, yes, we do give too much glory to people in wrong places. And that's nobody's fault but your house. That's a house problem. And you let your children look up to certain entertainers, celebrities, and it's almost like they have the voice in your kid's life when you got a pastor that has the words of eternal life. And I'm not saying glorify him. Don't misrepresent what I'm saying. But I'm saying, I'm asking a question. Who are you giving that influence to? So that's the caveat. Do we glorify or do we give enough affirmation to the fathers that are in church? Absolutely not. When we do Mother's Day here, mothers, what do y'all wear on Mother's Day? Hats. Do y'all get gifts? Good gifts? I'm not even going to talk to the men, because the best they're going to get is a screwdriver, maybe, if the budget allows. But they're not getting no special attention. And the last few years, the Lord has really convicted me about that. And we've kind of flipped the script. And we said, no, you know what, ladies? Because on Father's Day, the men get bashed by the preacher. Y'all not doing this. You're not home. You're not spending enough time with your family. Boy, get back in that house. And we wear these men out. When the ladies, you know, it's all, I talk to my ladies so good. I get so many pies on Mother's Day, it's unbelievable. But the men, we're hard on men. And let me tell you something. Men operate off of affirmation. You know what, guys? I think y'all all that with chips and cookies, milk and dip. I think y'all got it all going on. And you know what? If you're at home taking care of your family, your wife, and your children, then God bless you. You're making a difference in our society. And I think we need those two guys, I always talk about them two guys at that Sonic drive-in. I don't like them fellas. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Val Calvert, and Tommy is my son. And I am department chair at San Antonio College for the Department of Business, Administrative Computer Technology, and Criminal Justice. First of all, I want to thank you for this panel. I think it's much needed. And what I would like to do is ask us, when you have a family member, a neighbor on the block, down the block, that have children, or a spouse, or a relative that goes to court, how many of you show up? Wow. How many of you show up? We need to show up in court. Who is marching now? How many of us are marching? And like Councilwoman Taylor said, we're comfortable in our homes. We have good jobs. We're not hungry. But we have babies that go to sleep every night who are hungry. Trayvon Martin just got the bandage ripped off the wounds that have been brewing for the last 30 to 40 years. This didn't just happen overnight. Right. I knew what the verdict would be. I told my husband, he's going to get off. And Rachel Gentile, she had an accent because she has a medical condition. They demoralized her in court. George Zimmerman's mother has an accent too, but that was okay. So we have to stop making these differences between us. We're all racially mixed. My family looks like the United Nations. We're so mixed up, I call myself Heinz 57. But race doesn't matter. It does not matter. That's right. My mother always told me, you take a person at face value, no matter what color they are. And that's what we have to do. But I think this panel is a great start to a great discussion. But you know, ask yourself those questions. Who's marching now? We haven't really marched since Martin Luther King died. None of us. We don't sit in court. I used to go to court when I was in the 12th grade in high school. I grew up in Houston. We sat in the courtroom. You don't have to have anyone on trial. Go and look and see what these judges are doing. You have that right. You elected them. So take advantage of that. And I'll give you some statistics. When I did my dissertation a few years ago, my doctoral dissertation, I did research on the number of African Americans, Mexican Americans, and whites that are in our prisons today. An African American male is 8 times more likely to go to jail for the same crime. A Hispanic male is 4 times more likely than a white male. And that is injustice. Thank you.
I'm trying to figure out if y'all making me feel good about being white or feeling bad about being white. Y'all got me going every direction here tonight. Well, you've done a great job raising your son. A great job. Wonderful. And I think you brought an excellent summation to the evening, and we appreciate what you had to say. If you do not know by now, I love Nelson Mandela. My favorite day of the year to preach is what day? I love it. I love it. I love preaching on that day. And it was actually Tommy's daddy that invited me to preach at the MLK March several years ago. And I think we disrupted a few things. And I haven't been invited back, but he's no longer over it. I understand that. Yeah. And it was a wonderful experience, and I'm indebted to him. Nelson Mandela said, no one is born hating another person because of their color or their background or their religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. Do you all agree with that? Let's love. Let's love. We're going to bring the evening to a conclusion. Thank you, guys. I think y'all were absolutely wonderful tonight. Excellent.